It's 8:40. Very good morning to you, whether you're watching on the TV, listening on the radio, in the car, perhaps. You've got 20 minutes to get to work. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne.
And we're going to have a quick look at the papers now. Joining us this morning, GBNEWS' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. And we are fascinated, and I know Stephen will be, in the one that you want to talk about particularly, Nigel, and that is NASA actually really sort of seriously looking at UFOs.
Yes, but they're not ruling out that they may be actually piloted by aliens. They're not saying they are, just they're not ruling out the possibility they are. We don't call them UFOs anymore.
No,
apparently they're unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs.
It's not got this... That'll never catch on.
It won't, will it? No, I mean, they've been around so long, they should call them OAPs now. But
See,
anyway,
look at this. Now, this footage here, right, which is showing a craft of somebody is being tracked by a plane, a fast jet, and this just... no one knows what it is. It's just like this blob on the screen, but it's performing in remarkable ways.
Yeah, and this is taken from a US Navy pilot who actually photographed that. And a congressional inquiry has been looking into some of that footage. And what the pilots say, and these are actually, you know, pretty sensible people, they really are the top guns in America, what they're saying is, look, we don't know what's happening. This is what we saw. These aircraft moved in a way that was completely bizarre, that no aircraft that they know of could actually behave like that. The speed with which they fly, dropped out of the sky, that kind of thing.
It's the instant change of direction and things, isn't
all
it?
that sort of stuff, and they can go underwater and things like that.
More likely to be a drone?
Well, no, it couldn't be a drone because of the speed that the speed is actually travelling.
But this is why they want to take what they say, NASA say, they want to take a more data-driven approach, because so much of it is anecdotal, and it could be stuff like that. It could just be a drone, or it could be some weather phenomenon. We don't know. I mean, I think a lot of the UFO stuff has kind of been a subculture, but now it's becoming more mainstream. So that's why NASA's looking into it. But it was, but it's not now. Like, now it's like, it's part of mainstream political culture.
These things have always been seen by pilots, and astronauts have seen them.
Yeah.
They've always seen things they can't explain.
Yes.
Doesn't mean it's little green men.
No, it doesn't, no.
No, it doesn't. But interestingly, with this, what NASA have done is that they've said, out of all the sightings, they've got, I mean, a very high percentage are natural phenomena. Another high percentage are craft they can explain, but there is still this small group that say, we do not know what that is.
That's right. And
that's the key.
Nick Pope, who used to run the X-Files of the Ministry of Defence, what he says is, of all the things that he looked at, and he was looking at it for about 20 years, 5% can't be explained.
Not even like
very
Chinese
exciting.
weather balloons.
No, I mean, just you know, a lot of things can be explained, but that can't. Brian Cox, the rock and roll professor, he reckons there are probably 200 billion alien civilizations out there, but only one in each galaxy. So we've used up the quota for the Milky Way, which is why we don't meet people.
Which is why it's ridiculous to think they are aliens.
Well, we can't meet them because they're actually a long way away. If they exist.
Well, wormhole technology. Well, we'll get there. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. Now, were you watching Talking Pints, I should say, last night on Farage's show? Because Priti Patel, former Home Secretary, was on the show, and she was asked about abuse in public life. It was very interesting. Here's what you missed.
You, because of your views, because of your perfectly reasonable views, have been abused, have been accused of being a bully, and I've had some pretty vicious cartoons done of me, but I think the ones of you perhaps were even worse. You've received abuse on the most astonishing level. You've been painted out to be the devil, the witch, really, I mean, you know, you've been painted out to be, I'm just awful, you're evil. That must impact you and your family.
So it's deeply unpleasant, and even this year I've had people try to assault me as well when I've been going about my daily business, you know, just going to work. At the end of the day, you know, when you're a public figure, public servant, and I'm dedicated to my work...
No, it's a rough game.
It is difficult, but, you know, I also try and protect my family from that. And the people that get very upset about it, clearly my husband, you know, my mum and dad in particular. I don't like that. I really don't.
No.
But, you know, it's not acceptable. It is simply not acceptable.
But you're tough.
But also public, you know, public discourse is just really degenerated.
Well,
see, but I think that's really interesting. And I should say, I know Pretty on a personal level, and as a person, she is actually a really lovely, gentle sort of person. I wouldn't want to work for her, because I think she can be probably quite a tough boss, but she's, you know, that's part of the job, isn't it?
So many people are like that. In their private lives, they're pussycats. At work, they're tough because it's a different thing. I think doing a job like she does as well, Home Secretary, same as Suella Braverman, you have to be like that. But I think it can put a lot of people off because they do become figures of hate. And people forget they are human beings. And social media opens up all new dimensions for abuse as well.
Doesn't it just, Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that women politicians tend to have it worse. When I've seen some of the tweets and the messages they've got, they are absolutely appalling and they're really disgusting. I mean, Rory Stewart was talking about the impact on mental health the other day. Obviously, Pretty's been doing it there. I've worked in the House of Commons for nearly 40 years and I've had my own fair share of abuse that's come through. So even journalists get it. I think that's slightly different with journalists is that if we're putting ourselves out there, you'd expect people to have the right to come back and say what they feel, as long as it's not threatening or racist or anything like that.
But why is it that women get a worse deal on this? Because I think that is a really fair point, and whatever party they're from.
And it can become quite personal, actually, and especially about your looks. I mean, I don't know if every woman experiences this, but most women I know will say you'll get very personal comments about your appearance. And that can be really demoralising. You know, that's not what you want to be valued for. I don't read comments on social media. I'm not interested. I think it can shape your opinion, and you don't want that. You know, you don't want to be shaped by your worst critic online.
Well, I mean, Theresa May made the point a couple of days ago that she was saying that her dresses and the things she wore were the things that people used to focus in on, and made the point people don't do that about men.
Yeah, it's a fair point, but we wear more of a uniform.
I think we may wear a uniform. There's not much to actually criticise, or, well, maybe there is now. I haven't looked at my social media. But, I mean, it is different for a man. But it still seems to be that women are denigrated as if you're concentrating on that rather than what they're saying.
Why would people pick on particularly female politicians to be so horrible to them?
I think because they can. That's the awful thing about it, or they think they can.
Yeah, it's not right. It definitely isn't right. Anyway, but let's move away from politics to something which affects every single one of us. Well, at least has the potential. 2 words that should terrify any homeowner in the UK: Japanese knotweed.
Japanese knotweed.
Ugh.
It's been here in the UK since the 19th century, but now an estimated 1.39 million homes are being affected by Japanese knotweed.
Ugh, hate to say it. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Repo has been to speak to some of the people who are fighting back.
Nature's very own nightmare. Japanese knotweed affects an estimated 4% of all UK properties and has cost our economy almost £250 million in the past decade.
What are we looking at? So we've got a significant amount of Japanese knotweed here.
This property has become overrun. When it became difficult for the owner to sell it, they called in reinforcements.
The best time to treat Japanese knotweed is August, September and October. So we typically do 9 visits over 3 years, followed by another 2 years of monitoring.
For the tenants of this property, the presence of Japanese knotweed has become a real issue.
Frustrating. We've been trying to get it dealt with and treated so that we can be a bit more safe and secure. And our neighbours either side have already had theirs treated, so both of those companies are pushing hard to make sure that it doesn't spread back out onto their land.
This may well be a costly problem to solve, but the alternative is often far worse. Mortgages can be denied, sales can fall through, and if you sell your property but fail to declare the presence of this plant, even if you're unaware of it, be ready to pay the price.
that's actually classed as misrepresentation. And in the UK currently, the average cost of being sued for misrepresentation for Japanese knotweed is £32,000. There was a case just a couple of weeks ago where the person got sued for £200,000 for misrepresenting the fact that he got Japanese knotweed in the garden. So it's a big deal.
Up and down the UK, there are scenes just like this one. Infestations of Japanese knotweed disrupting the British ecosystem. Now, this plant was brought to our shores all the way back in 1850 as nothing more than a species to be studied and used in people's gardens. Little did they know back then the chaos that would come with it. Research from EnviroNet highlights the northwest as one of the areas worst affected by this issue. As a result, last year, John, the head of a fly fishing group in Bolton, decided it was time to take some action.
It forces out all native vegetation, mainly because it grows earlier and taller, so it takes the light away from native vegetation. The native vegetation it lives in harmony together, and that the Japanese knotweed has destroyed that.
Determined to do their bit, John and his team will spend the next couple of months trying to tackle the Japanese knotweed in their local area. But with it now deemed the UK's most aggressive, destructive and invasive plant, it's clear the war on this weed rages on. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Oh,
Wow.
Would you realise it was so bad? So bad. Headline makers, what do you make of that one, Candice?
Yeah, so I mean, Japanese knotweed is an absolute nightmare. I've also heard bamboo is pretty terrible as well. I mean, I've seen editorials in the Daily Mail where they've showed it growing up through the foundation of houses. And like these people say, it can really affect you being able to sell your house. If you don't tell people about it, you can get sued. I mean, who knew something like this could be such a big problem, but it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember from going back to local newspaper days, I was doing stories about Japanese knotweed, and one of the problems seemed to be somebody would have it in their house, it would then spread over to a neighbour's house, and the neighbour couldn't do anything about it. And when as the first time I've heard you could be sued for misrepresentation if you didn't declare it.
Even if you don't know.
If you didn't know, exactly. So if you're in a situation where it was growing through your house but had nothing to do with you, you could find yourself being sued for an awful lot of money.
What worried me about the eradication expert, saying, well, we treat it now and come back 3 months later, then 6 months, then 2 years. How long does it take to get rid of the blooming stuff?
Yeah, it sounds like you can't. I mean, this sounds like a massive problem, actually. It seems like it's being dealt with on an ad hoc basis, but if it's actually really affecting the commercial value of homes, maybe we need a more organised approach to it. Because it sounds like people are just getting caught out by it, and it's not their fault, especially if it can just be a neighbour, and they've been irresponsible, but it affects you. It's not fair.
No, it's not fair.
It's a real worry, isn't it?
I mean, I guess the other thing is all about the declaration. But if you declare it in your property,
you can't sell your property anyway. So.
Well, if you do, you're going to sell it at a reduced cost.
Yes. So I mean, you're losing out either way. Whatever you do, there's no way of winning. And the trouble is, it seems to be you can't eradicate it. You can't get rid of it. It keeps hanging around or coming back, and that seems to be the biggest problem.
Yeah. Oh dear me, it's grim stuff.
Who thought? And did it really come from Japan, I wonder?
Well, I presume so.
I presume so.
With a name like that, I'd be a bit disappointed if it didn't.
Well, you never know.
I'll tell you what, it's one of those things you hear about, though, and you don't necessarily realise just how bad it is. Anyway, if you're suffering from that, let us know this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. Let's get a check on your weather. Here's Alex.